Welcome back. Although we already went over basic checkmates and endgame principles, that's still far from everything you need to know about the endgame. There are still some questions left unanswered, such as, what is the least amount of material I can win with in the endgame? And when is it impossible to win an endgame? In this video, I'll be answering these questions plus a few others. This was briefly covered in a video, but I'll do a review here. If it is impossible for you to checkmate with the only pieces you have left, and your opponent is also unable to checkmate with only the pieces they have left, the game is declared a draw due to insufficient material. For example, king and knight versus king, and king and bishop versus king are both draws, because it's simply impossible to checkmate with only those pieces. A good guideline to use when trying to figure out if there is insufficient material or not is to imagine the best possible position you or your opponent can get with the remaining pieces. If that position isn't checkmate, it's a draw. The least amount of material you can force a win with in the endgame is actually a king and a pawn, because if you can get the pawn to the other side safely, it can turn into a queen. However, whether the side with the pawn is winning highly depends on the position. For example, in this position, white is winning if it's black's move, and black draws if it's white's move. This is because if black moves, white gets to make progress towards the pawn becoming a queen. But if white moves, black can block him from making progress. If it's black's move, the winning process is going to look something like this. Black would move his king to d6. White would move his king to f5. Black would play king to e7. White would play king e5. The important thing about having the king in these positions is this is the opposition. As if your opponent's turn to move and it's the opposition, you are in good shape. Because whoever moves first has to give ground and allow the other king to move forward. Or, in black's case, as we'll go over, allow them to keep the opposition and prevent the opponent from making progress. After king d6, king f5, white's king is already in a position from the side where it can help the pawn forward. And after king e7, king e5, he's getting even closer to the end. Essentially, white wants to make sure that he can get his pawn to e8 safely. If he manages that, he wins the game. However, if it's black to move, that's what we already went over. If it's white to move, black draws. This is because the king can't get far in front of a pawn like he was able to earlier, and having the king behind the pawn is not enough to win. If white tries a move like king to d4, then after king to d6, e4, king to e6, black is preventing white from taking the opposition, and he takes it every single time. It's now white's move. He can either move the king to the side or he can push his pawn forward. He'd probably want to do that. And finally, at the end, we reach a position of reciprocal zugzwang. That's a fancy way to say that no matter whose turn it is to move, the player who has to move is not going to want to do so. Here, white's only move that doesn't lose the pawn is to play king to e6 with a draw by stalemate. If it's black's move, black would have to play king to f7, allowing white to get his king to d7, meaning he can safely promote his pawn. If black is able to just stay in front of a pawn and prevent white's king from getting through, black can force that position to be the best white can get. If black has to move out of the way of in front of it, though, it's a good possibility that this position will happen with black to move, meaning that white wins. So let's say that the same position happens again, but with black to move. After taking the opposition a couple of times and then getting far up the board, white can start pushing the pawn. And when it's close, he can finally take the opposition. This position is winning for white no matter whose turn it is to move, because if it's black's move, which it is here, the king defends all three squares and the pawn will march safely to become a queen. If it is white's move, white will move to the side, black will move to the side, white will push the pawn, and will actually end up in this position or something very close to it, with black to move. Okay, so how is all of that useful? Well, we now know that if we are up a knight or a bishop, we have to make sure to keep at least one of our pawns or we usually can't win. In addition, we now know that an extra pawn alone can be enough to win an endgame, because if everything else is exchanged off, you have a chance to promote it. Essentially, take every tiny advantage you can get in the endgame, and take good care of your pawns. Thanks for watching.